speaking about the role of law in a PPP or public-private partnership in the area of the right to education. And I will be talking about it in the context of India especially. So in India, we have the fundamental right to education guaranteed under Article 21A. Article 21A guarantees that the state shall provide to all children free and compulsory education to children between the ages of 6 to 14 years in any manner that the state may by law determine. And one of the ways in which the state has proceeded in guaranteeing this right to free and compulsory education is by a new law that was introduced in 2009 known as the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act. This law has been quite radical because for the first time it includes private schools, both aided and completely unaided by the state, and includes them within the ambit of the right to education. A brief overview of the law which I would like to provide is that the law mandates that all private schools, whether they get any aid from the government or not, are required to reserve 25% of their seats in their first grade class and provide them free of cost to children from poor and economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And the state would reimburse the schools for the costs of these children at the state's cost per child. And so therefore, in effect, it's the state that is subsidizing the education of these children in private schools. The other requirements of the law is that all schools are required to mandatorily comply with norms and standards that are required to be implemented in every school. And some of these basic norms and standards are the provision of midday meals, provision of drinking water, ensuring that basic infrastructure such as classrooms of a certain kind, a mandated pupil-teacher ratio, having facilities such as a playground, library, a boundary wall, accessibility requirements for children with disabilities are all there in every school, whether the school is a public school or a private school. This, in effect, is completely radical because we never had any education law that mandated these requirements in a school. And for the first time, these requirements have been laid down. Now, this act certainly brings in the private sector right at the center of the right to education obligation. And there are certainly benefits and risks to the strategy of the state. Benefits, what are the benefits? Certainly there are a lot of benefits to this law. The first benefit, of course, is that it provides access to thousands of children from poor and economically disadvantaged backgrounds, or even children from other disadvantaged groups such as children with disabilities, children with HIV, children of single mothers, all of who have been included within the definition of disadvantaged groups. And it is for the first time that many of these children would be able to get access in private schools, which would have been completely out of reach for them due to financial reasons. And therefore, the biggest benefit of this law is ensuring access to quality education, to ensuring inclusion and diversity in these schools. And some of the early studies, empirical studies that have been done on such inclusion has shown that the inclusion has actually worked really well. Children from poor backgrounds who have gone into elite private schools have, after 2 or 3 years, have adjusted really well, not only with their peers, but also in the school, and are able to adjust to the curriculum just as well as other children have. So many of the arguments that were raised earlier by private schools and parents that children from the poor or disadvantaged groups or children from a different class will not be able to adjust are all proved wrong. Another big advantage or benefit what we see is that many private schools are willingly taking up and implementing all the provisions of the RTE Act as really a way of providing quality education and ensuring access. And that is a huge advantage, because this certainly would have an effect of influencing other private schools as well. The risks or disadvantages of this kind of a model, there are a few disadvantages, and the risks we see is that a lot of private schools are vehemently opposing this inclusion model, or the inclusion of private schools in providing education when they aren't getting any aid from the state. There are huge parents groups that are also opposing the inclusion of children within private schools, which is subsidized by the state. And this has led to a large spate of litigation, which has been filed, not only challenging the RTE Act, but also other provisions of the law. In the initial challenges to the RTE Act, the Supreme Court exempted schools from religious and linguistic minority groups to be covered under the law, and therefore a lot of private schools have been going to court seeking exemption from coverage of the law, claiming to be minority schools. So certainly this is a big disadvantage, because this has led to a lot of children who would have got admission in these schools being subject to litigation, and some of them have often also lost an entire academic year due to this uncertain scenario. Another big disadvantage that I see is that often the attention of the state government and civil society and activist groups has been on the enforcement of this 25% requirement of admission on private schools, rather than perhaps focusing or equally focusing on other aspects of the law, such as mandating quality education in public schools, for example. There is no focus on, or there is rather a lack of focus on ensuring that public schools also comply with norms and standards, because a large bulk of the schools in India are government schools, and today we have a majority of the government schools which also don't comply with the basic norms and standards. So what could be effective mechanisms for a better implementation of the strategy? I would say that certainly one strong focus has to be on implementation of norms and standards, both in public and private schools, to ultimately ensure that all children get access to quality education. And certainly the most important thing that we need is a monitoring mechanism. We have the RTE Act, which is a radical legislation that has brought about all these changes in the law, but there are no mechanisms right now in place to ensure that the Act is being implemented effectively, and we need to put in place some monitoring mechanisms to ensure that all schools, whether they're public or private schools, are complying with the law. Thank you.